What happens when a royal sits down for one of the most prestigious interviews in America, only to walk out in fury? Prince Harry's highly anticipated 60 Minutes interview with Anderson Cooper began with warmth and composure. But as questions deepened, the tension cracked wide open. This wasn't just an interview. It was a slow-burning collision between a seasoned journalist and a defiant royal, spiraling into one of the most unforgettable walkouts in television history. The room was calm, understated, and intimate, just like every 60 Minutes setup. No grand stage, no studio audience, just two chairs, a coffee table, and the unmistakable quiet of serious journalism. Anderson Cooper greeted Prince Harry warmly, extending his hand with a respectful smile. "Harry, thank you for being here," Anderson began, his tone carrying both gravity and hospitality. Harry nodded curtly, his posture relaxed but with a certain stiffness that hinted at the storm underneath. "Well, I suppose the world expects me to explain myself, so here I am." Anderson chuckled lightly, steering the moment back to ease. "That's the beauty of conversations like this. People get to hear directly from you." The first few minutes unfolded smoothly. Anderson asked about Harry's life in America, his projects, the transition from royal duties to private ventures, and the challenges of raising a family outside the crown's shadow. Harry's answers, though, already carried a sharper edge than expected. "America has been tolerable," he said, his voice tinged with arrogance. "At least here I don't have to bow to outdated rituals or pretend my family understands me. It's liberating to finally live in a place where people treat me as special, not just a spare part of a system." Anderson adjusted in his chair, unfazed. He had interviewed presidents, generals, and celebrities under fire. Ego and pride were no strangers to him. He leaned forward slightly. "But isn't there also comfort in tradition? A sense of stability, perhaps?" Harry smirked. "Comfort for whom? For the ones sitting on golden thrones. Tradition is just a cage with better wallpaper. My family clings to it because it hides the cracks." The tension in the room shifted ever so slightly. Anderson noticed the sudden flash of defiance in Harry's eyes, but his own tone stayed calm, steady. "That's an interesting way of putting it. And yet, millions still admire the monarchy, seeing it as a symbol of unity and resilience. What do you say to them?" Harry's reply came swift, dismissive. "I say they're infatuated with a fairy tale. They don't see the machinery behind it, the manipulation, the silencing, the control. They celebrate the crown, but they don't care who bleeds for it." Anderson gave a small pause, his journalist instincts sharp. He recognized the early signs of escalation, but part of his role was to let the truth unravel, even if it grew uncomfortable. He shifted gently to a different angle. "Let's talk about family," he said softly. "You've spoken about Meghan and your children with deep emotion before. How is life as a husband and father away from the institution?" Harry's jaw tightened, though he smiled faintly. "Life as a husband and father is exactly as it should be, mine. And frankly, the press has no right to dissect it, nor does the monarchy. I protect what's mine. That's more than they ever did for me." Anderson nodded but didn't let the arrogance slide. "But when you speak publicly, whether in interviews, documentaries, or your book, you open the door for questions. Do you feel there's a contradiction between demanding privacy while also sharing intimate details on your own terms?" Harry's eyes flickered with irritation. "That's a tired argument. Privacy doesn't mean silence. It means control. I decide what the world deserves to know, not the other way around. If people can't grasp that, then they're not worth addressing." The shift was undeniable now. What started as an engaging interview was tilting toward confrontation. Anderson, however, remained composed, even offering a half smile. "That's certainly one way of putting it. Some might say that sounds selective." Harry leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Selective? No, it's called freedom. Something you, as an American, should understand better than most." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The warmth of the opening had evaporated, replaced by an icy tension that made even the quietest creaks of the set sound loud. Anderson gave a slow nod, jotting down a note on his pad, though his expression remained neutral. Inside, though, he knew this was no ordinary interview. This was a powder keg, and Harry was holding the match. The stillness in the room was deceptive. Cameras rolled quietly, crew members barely dared to breathe, and in the center sat two men, one seasoned in the art of journalism, the other simmering with defiance. The tension was now visible, like heat rising from asphalt. Anderson Cooper leaned forward slightly, his tone still measured, calm, but his questions sharpened just enough to pierce through Harry's polished armor. "You've spoken about your struggles with the institution," Anderson began, "but I want to ask about something deeper. Your mother, Princess Diana, became a global symbol not only because of her role, but because of the way she connected with people. Do you feel that you carry her legacy?" For a moment, Harry's lips pressed together in a thin line. The question touched a raw nerve, and his response came fast, clipped. "Legacy is a word the media loves. You put my mother on pedestals, you tore her down, and then you expect me to carry that weight as though it's a crown I should be grateful for. I am not my mother's replacement, and I won't let anyone use her name to measure me." Anderson nodded slowly, keeping his composure. "Fair point. But many see you as continuing her spirit of independence, of challenging tradition. Isn't that something you embrace?" Harry scoffed, leaning back in his chair with folded arms. "You all want to turn me into a symbol because it makes for better headlines. I'm not here to be a candle in the wind for anyone's nostalgia. My mother's memory belongs to me, to my family, not to the public, and not to journalists trying to spin a story." The words were sharp, almost accusatory. Anderson absorbed them without flinching, his decades of experience carrying him through. "All right," Anderson said softly, "then let's pivot. Megan, the two of you have spoken at length about the difficulties you've faced. Some critics argue that your marriage pulled you further from your family. How do you respond to that?" Harry's eyes flashed with irritation. "Critics? You mean the same people who have never met her, who write columns from behind desks, pretending they understand what marriage means? Megan saved me from a suffocating institution. She didn't pull me away. She freed me. Anyone who can't see that is blind." Anderson kept his voice even, though Harry's hostility was now undeniable. "But when you describe her as saving you, doesn't that imply that without her, you'd still be trapped? Doesn't that give her an almost singular power over your decisions?" Harry smirked, shaking his head. "Singular power? Number, it's called partnership. Something most journalists like you can't comprehend because you're too busy dissecting other people's relationships instead of living your own." The sting was direct, but Anderson maintained his professional mask, refusing to bite back. Instead, he scribbled another note and pivoted again. "You've also been open about raising your children in America. How is fatherhood different here than it might have been back in the UK?" Harry exhaled sharply, as though the question itself bored him. "It's simple. Here, my children get to be normal. They're not props for photographers. They're not pawns in some royal chess game. And unlike back home, they have a father who protects them." Anderson tilted his head. "So you don't believe your family would have protected them?" Harry's tone was almost mocking. "Protected them? The monarchy doesn't even protect its own heirs, let alone the so-called spare's children. My children would have been sacrifices on the altar of tradition. That's not family, that's exploitation." Anderson gave a small sigh, his patience tested but still intact. "Some might argue that by stepping into documentaries, books, and interviews like this one, you're also putting them in the spotlight, just under your own terms. How do you reconcile that?" Harry leaned forward now, his voice growing harder. "I don't need to reconcile anything. I decide what's best for my family. The media doesn't. The Crown doesn't. And certainly not people like you." The room chilled instantly. Anderson's jaw flexed, but his tone stayed calm. "It seems every question about accountability, Harry, you redirect back to control. Do you think there's room for balance?" Harry's smirk widened, almost smug. "Balance is a myth. You either control your story or it controls you. I refuse to be a victim of narrative anymore. That's something you'll never understand because your entire career depends on poking at other people's lives." For the first time, Anderson's brow furrowed, the faintest sign of irritation flickering across his otherwise steady demeanor. He let the silence stretch, watching Harry revel in it. Finally, he spoke, his tone deliberate. Let's look ahead then. What do you see for yourself in the future? What does life look like for Prince Harry 10 years from now? Harry chuckled under his breath, but it wasn't warm, it was condescending. The future? The future is mine, not something I need to lay out like a press release for public consumption. I'll do what I want, when I want, and people can either accept that or choke on their expectations. Anderson tapped his pen against his note. Once, twice, slowly. The calm mask was still there, but the weight behind his eyes betrayed the storm building. He shifted slightly in his chair, exhaled, and leaned back. Interesting, Martin, he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he looked back at Harry. You know, Harry, I've interviewed people at their highest and lowest points. Presidents under scandal, soldiers returning from war, families broken by tragedy. They all shared one thing: humility. Do you think there's a risk that yours has been lost along the way? Harry stiffened, the smugness momentarily slipping into a scowl. Humility? Don't lecture me about humility. I've lived through things you couldn't survive. If I come across as unapologetic, it's because I've earned the right to be. Humility is for those still begging for approval. I don't need anyone's. The words echoed heavier than anything before. The air in the room thickened, the kind of silence that felt suffocating. Anderson gave a slow nod, his voice still calm but edged now with steel. That's one way of seeing it. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone in the room felt the same thing. This interview was teetering on the edge of collapse, and the fall was coming fast. The quiet of the set had turned heavy, almost oppressive. The crew, trained to remain invisible, now felt trapped in the tension building between the two men. Every exchange chipped away at the polished surface of civility, leaving cracks wide enough for the audience at home to feel through their screens. Anderson Cooper adjusted slightly in his chair, his pen resting motionless against the notepad. His voice remained steady, but there was a hint of weariness creeping in. Harry, he said carefully, you've spoken about control, about carving your own path, but critics have pointed out that many of your public appearances, your book, the Netflix series, interviews like this one, still revolve around the monarchy. How do you respond to people who say you're trying to escape an institution while never really letting it go? Harry gave a sharp laugh, short and biting. Critics, always critics. They cling to their illusions, desperate to keep the crown polished. Let me be clear. I talk about it because it shaped me, because it scarred me. The monarchy isn't something you just walk away from. It's stamped into your skin. If I choose to expose its flaws, that's my right. If people can't handle the truth, that's their problem. Anderson raised an eyebrow, his calm expression unbroken. But you've also profited from those flaws. Do you see the contradiction there? Harry leaned forward now, eyes narrowing. Profited? Tell me, Anderson, is it profit when you claw back pieces of your life that were stolen from you? Or is it survival? I took back my story, and if people want to pay to hear it, so be it. Better they hear it from me than from the tabloids you people love to quote. The dismissive tone carried an edge that even Anderson's legendary patience couldn't smooth away. He kept his voice level, but it was tighter now. I don't quote tabloids. I ask questions the public wants answered. There's a difference, Harry smirked. Semantics. At the end of the day, you're still digging, still feeding the public appetite for drama. You're no different than the rest of them. The insult hung in the air, and this time Anderson didn't smile it away. His eyes flickered with something sharper, though his voice remained calm. You've been very critical of the press. Yet here you are again, sitting in front of cameras. Is it fair to say you want the attention just on your terms? Harry's lips curled into a mocking half-smile. Ah, the old trap question. Attention, fame, celebrity. Do you people ever get tired of recycling the same narrative? I'm not here because I want your attention. I'm here because you begged for mine. Let's not pretend otherwise. The arrogance in his tone sent a ripple through the room. A producer in the back shifted uncomfortably. Even the faint hum of the lights seemed to grow louder. Anderson sat still, absorbing the jab, his composure intact but visibly fraying. All right, Anderson said softly. Let's shift gears again. You've mentioned often how much your mother meant to you. She fought for her independence, for her voice, sometimes against the same institution you criticize. Do you think she would be proud of the way you've handled things? Harry's jaw tightened. His eyes flashed with something between anger and pain. Don't you dare sit there and use my mother as a prop in your little broadcast. You never knew her. You never knew what she endured, and you have no right to speculate about what she would or wouldn't think. Anderson let the words settle, his expression unchanging, but his patience was thinning to a thread. I wasn't speculating. I was asking your perspective. There's a difference, Harry. Harry leaned back, his voice rising slightly, arrogance dripping from every word. Perspective? My perspective doesn't need your validation. It doesn't need anyone's. If you think you can corner me into some sentimental soundbite, you're wasting your time. Anderson's pen tapped once against the notepad, then fell still. He exhaled slowly, visibly steadying himself. Very well. Let's talk about Meghan. Many admire her, others criticize her. How has her role shaped the man you are today? Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it, only disdain. Here we go. Always Meghan, always the obsession. Let me spell it out for you. Meghan isn't my role model. She's my partner. If people can't accept that, then perhaps they're stuck in the past, just like you. Why don't you ask about my work, my projects, instead of parroting what the world already speculates about? Anderson's smile was thin now, his professionalism tested. I have asked about your work. You've steered every answer back to grievances with your family or the press. Do you think it's possible that your critics might have a point? That your story has become defined by resentment rather than purpose? Harry's face hardened, his voice dropping to a low growl. Critics. Always the critics with you. I don't owe anyone purpose. I don't owe you a tidy narrative. I live for myself, not for approval. The arrogance was suffocating now. Anderson leaned forward, his tone still calm but edged with steel. And yet, you sit here on one of the most watched programs in America demanding to be heard. That, Harry, is a contradiction worth noting. Harry's response was venomous. Spare me the lecture, Anderson. You thrive on contradictions. Without people like me, you'd have nothing to fill your precious airtime. Remember that before you try to moralize, the silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Crew members shifted, exchanging uneasy glances. Anderson's calm demeanor hadn't cracked fully, but the weight of Harry's arrogance was pressing down hard. Finally, Anderson straightened in his chair, his tone low and deliberate. I've interviewed leaders, survivors, people who've endured unimaginable loss. They all carried themselves with dignity. What I'm seeing here, Harry, is something else entirely. Harry's eyes narrowed, his smirk returning. Dignity is overrated. Survival is all that matters. And I've survived more than you'll ever understand. The words landed with finality, but not respect. The room was now charged with hostility, the breaking point just a breath away. Everyone could feel it. The fuse had burned almost to its end. Anderson sat back, his composure hanging by a thread. The next question, the next exchange, would decide everything. The studio was quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive, pulsing with unspoken tension. Anderson Cooper sat poised in his chair, his face calm but his eyes sharp, studying the man across from him. Prince Harry, arms folded and chin lifted, wore the look of someone convinced he had won each exchange simply by refusing to bend. But beneath the smug exterior, there was a flicker of unease, like a fire that had grown too hot to control. Anderson cleared his throat, his voice steady. Harry, let's step back. For nearly an hour now, we've talked about family, your choices, your life here in America. You've said a lot about control, about refusing to be defined by others. But I have to ask you plainly, don't you think your behavior, this defensiveness, this hostility, is defining you more than anything your family or the press ever could? Harry smirked, tilting his head. Defensiveness? Hostility? I call it honesty, something your industry is allergic to. The problem isn't me, it's people like you who want me boxed into a fairy tale. Newsflash, I don't fit in the box, and I never will. Anderson's pen tapped once against his notepad. He leaned forward slightly, his voice now edged with steel. This isn't about fairy tales, Harry. This is about accountability. Every time I ask about your family, you lash out. When I ask about your wife, you scoff. When I ask about your future, you dismiss it. At what point do you stop blaming everyone else and start looking in the mirror? Harry's expression hardened. He leaned forward too, his words coming sharp. You sit there in judgment, as if you know what it's like to be hounded every second of your life. You don't. None of you do, and yet you expect me to bow my head and answer politely? Number. That's over. I'm done playing by anyone's rules but my own. The air grew heavier, every eye in the room fixed on the two men. Anderson's patience, stretched thinner than ever, finally snapped. He set his pen down deliberately and locked eyes with Harry. Let me tell you something, Anderson said, his voice low but cutting. I've interviewed presidents under fire, war veterans broken and rebuilt, survivors of unimaginable loss. Do you know what they all had in common? Humility, gratitude, a sense of responsibility. What I see here isn't courage, it's arrogance. You call it honesty. I call it entitlement. Harry blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Entitlement? From you? He scoffed, trying to recover. You don't get to define me. You don't get to lecture me about humility. I've lived a life you couldn't survive a day in. Anderson shook his head slowly. No, Harry. You've been given a life most people couldn't imagine. And instead of owning that, instead of using it with grace, you sit here sneering at every question, treating every opportunity as an insult. That's not survival. That's self-destruction. The words hit harder than any question before. Harry's jaw clenched, his face flushing with anger. You think you can shame me? You think I owe you anything? I don't owe anyone explanations. Least of all you, Anderson, didn't flinch. Then why are you here? Why sit in this chair under these cameras, if not to explain yourself? You rail against the media, yet you run to the spotlight. You talk about freedom, yet you're shackled to your bitterness. You want to be heard, Harry, but you don't want to listen. And that, more than anything, is why you're here alone, without the institution, without the family, without the respect you think you deserve. Harry's fists tightened against the arms of his chair. His voice rose, sharp and defensive. You think you know me? You don't. You're just another voice in the chorus, another vulture pretending to care. My family didn't deserve me. The monarchy didn't deserve me. And maybe the world doesn't either. But I'll still live my truth, whether you like it or not. Anderson leaned back, his expression finally hardening. The calm facade was gone, replaced by something colder. You want the truth? Here it is. You're not living your truth. You're hiding behind it. You're not the brave rebel you think you are. You're a man who had everything in mind and decided to burn it down, not with purpose, but with a pride. And if Diana were here, I think she'd weep at what you've become. The words were like a strike across the room. Harry froze, the arrogance faltering for a split second, replaced by raw anger. He pushed back his chair, the scrape loud against the studio floor. That's it, he spat. I won't sit here and be insulted. This interview is over. Gasps rippled from the crew. A producer raised a hand as if to calm the situation, but Harry was already standing, storming toward the exit with his microphone still clipped, the wire snapping loose as he tore it away. Anderson watched him go, his voice steady as he turned back to the camera. Sometimes the hardest truth to hear is the one that cuts closest to the bone. Tonight you've seen a man unwilling to face his reflection. That's his choice. But our job is to ask and to listen, even when the answers come wrapped in arrogance. He exhaled, his gaze softening as he addressed the audience directly. I want to apologize to you, our viewers. We hoped for honesty and reflection. What we got was something else entirely, but perhaps, in its own way, it revealed more than any answer could. The cameras lingered on Anderson's calm face for a moment before cutting to black. And in living rooms across America, audiences sat stunned. The prince who had come to tell his story had walked away instead, leaving behind not clarity, but controversy. Was this the most dramatic interview of Harry's career? Or just another example of him clashing with the press? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you were shocked. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more unbelievable moments like this one.